So today we're going to be understanding plot, and as an example we're going to be using The Lion King. So there are some important things you need to know about plot. The first being that it doesn't always follow a linear path. This means that different types of stories go about telling the story in a different way. There are also different types of plot structures. The plot structure we're going to be talking about today is called the narrative, and the narrative is usually divided into three parts. You have your setup, your conflict, and your resolution. So before beginning any story, you should know about certain characters in that story, and pretty much every story has a protagonist and an antagonist, so we're going to compare the two. You have the protagonist on one side and the antagonist on the other. And the protagonist is usually the main character of the story, and the protagonist is usually the good characters, but in rare occurrences can be the bad character. The antagonist, on the other hand, is usually a central character to the story, but not necessarily the main character, and is usually the bad guy in the story, or the nemesis or the enemy of the protagonist. So to understand this plot structure of the story, we usually use something called Freytag's pyramid. And in the bottom left here we have the exposition or the introduction. Then we have the rising action. At the top there we have the climax, then the falling action, and we have something called the denouement or the resolution. And just something to remember that's important about stories is that stories can have more than one important event for each part of the pyramid. For example, there can be more than one climax. Likewise, there can be multiple points for each section of the pyramid, and we're going to see this example later on. So just a little fun fact before we get into talking about The Lion King. The Lion King has a connection to William Shakespeare, and The Lion King is actually based off of Shakespeare's play Hamlet. And if you're familiar with the play Hamlet, then you'll understand the connection. So before beginning any story, it's important to know about the characters. And the first important character is Simba, and he's the son of Mufasa and the future king of the Pride Lands. We have Mufasa, and he is the father of Simba and the king of the Pride Lands. And then we have Scar, and he's the younger brother of Mufasa and the uncle to Simba. So here's Freytag's pyramid in conjunction with The Lion King. And in the introduction you have the birth of Simba, and then you have Mufasa showing Simba his kingdom and explaining what it means to be king. In your rising action, you have Scar, and this is when he begins to become jealous of the young Prince Simba. He sets up a plan with the help of the hyenas to get Simba and Mufasa killed in a stampede so that Scar will eventually be able to become king. In that stampede, unfortunately, Mufasa dies, but Simba survives. Scar then convinces Simba to believe that it's his own fault that his father was killed. So Simba, believing that it's his own fault, he runs away and he meets Timon and Pumbaa, and they teach him the Hakuna Matata lifestyle. And here we have the first part of the climax where Nala, Simba's childhood friend, finds him and encourages him to go back home and to reclaim his kingdom. In the second part of the climax, we have Simba returning, and he fights Scar on Pride Rock. In the falling action, we have Simba winning the battle against Scar and turning the hyenas against him. And then we have Simba telling Scar to leave and never return. And then in the resolution, the first part, we have Simba reclaiming his land, and he's now known as the Lion King. And then the story culminates in Simba and Nala having a baby together and the birth of their baby. Just some important parts to remember again about the story: the three parts of the narrative, the setup, the conflict, and the resolution. And if we were going to tie these three parts to The Lion King, the setup would have the birth of Simba, the death of Mufasa, and the emergence of the evilness of Scar. The conflict would have Simba's struggle with the death of his father and his internal battle over whether or not to go back home and reclaim his kingdom. And we have the resolution with Simba's defeat of Scar and becoming the Lion King. And that's it.